But welcome to our third session of the Maine Engagement and Attendance Center office hours. And today we're focusing on establishing early warning systems and team-based responses. So as we know, we've had two sessions so far. Our first focused on creating emotionally and physically safe environments. Second, we focused on building routines, relationships, and relevance. And today, establishing early warning systems and team-based responses. So very quickly, our agenda will look like we'll start off just kind of going over really quickly what we're going to be doing. Then we'll meet our content expert, Miss Jess Anderson from Count Me In. And then we'll take a look at some resources. We'll highlight evidence-based tier 1 foundational practices, why it works, the theory behind it. So, and then we will, with our group as intimate as it is today, we will all stay together for our session and just have pretty casual conversations about what are some of the challenges we're facing, what are some of the things, the practices that we're engaging in that are really assisting in increasing attendance. So with that, again, I am Sarah Nelson. I am from the Maine Department of Education, the Office of School and Student Supports. I have the great pleasure of serving as the Student Engagement and Attendance Specialist for the state of Maine. And our content expert today will be Jess Anderson. Welcome aboard, Jess.
Thanks, Sarah. Would you like me to introduce myself? Is that where we're at in the agenda? Fantastic. So I am Jess Anderson. I am the director of Count Me In. I am the only full-time employee of Count Me In. Count Me In started around, actually a little bit over a decade ago in Southern Maine as a community-based partnership and initiative of individuals trying to figure out how to improve graduation rate. And that collective quickly realized that early intervention addressing chronic absenteeism in elementary school was really that path to improving high school graduation rates. Fast forward, now we have worked with over 100 Maine schools. We provide direct support and coaching. I do a lot of free professional development as well as low-cost professional development and partner with a number of organizations and schools in Maine to just move forward system-based solutions to improving chronic absenteeism. I live in Dresden, but work statewide. Count Me In does not have an office. I work remote. Often my background is my car. I have a 13-year-old 8th grader and spent over a decade in the classroom before coming into this role. So I am really looking forward to talking about early warning systems because I really think that that is the essence of what Count Me In started as, right? Was how are we using our data to drive our actions? And that's remain foundational to our work. So I'm going to pull up my slides. And given that we are a small group, please interrupt me if let's start at the beginning. Please interrupt me if you have questions as we go along. So the focus is how we use early warning systems to improve attendance. What does that mean? Couple goals. One, thinking about how simple, I don't want really complicated systems, simple proactive systems can help schools intervene more effectively. And I'll be braiding together not just attendance, but also behavior and academics in this conversation. I am going to share some real world examples with y'all. And there are probably 30 or 40 links to additional resources provided throughout these slides. So I am curious, and Sarah and Julie, you can answer this at the state level because you have data at your fingertips too. What is student data that you use, that you monitor to inform intervention, academic, behavioral, or attendance? What's the data that's under your fingertips, either in the chat or just shout it out? What are you using?
I use MIAS, even though it's every 2 years, but that's hot off the press. So Maine Integrated Youth Health Survey.
Awesome. Are there particular data fields that you're more interested in?
Yes, mattering and belonging, and making sure that kids, we're trending in the direction of kids knowing that there are adults who care about them in their schools and in their communities.
can you, at the state level, can you see district level data? Or do you have to wait for districts to share that back if you want to see it?
Right. What we do though is Dr. Carolyn Gross from our office works with schools to help them with their own data and to make sure that they do access it. So that's sort of our connection to it. We draw them to it.
Fantastic. Yeah, that is a great example of a piece of data, right? And so that data, the frequency of that is every 2 years. And schools are opting into that, right? Middle and high schools choose to participate in that data collection process, for sure. Sarah or Lynn, what are data that you are using?
So we have panorama surveys that we do to kind of gauge what you were talking about, like how students feel about school. But I also spend a lot of my time looking at like unexcused absences, and making sure that we're really monitoring those truancy, students who are nearing truancy or who are truant, and making sure that we're following guidelines in terms of making communication and sending out the letters and planning the meetings and things like that. And just connecting with families, really to figure out like what's going on, why are students struggling with attending. So that's
Yeah, so
our
looking
school.
kid by kid to see how many unexcused absences they've accumulated and whether they've crossed those thresholds
Mhm.
that are set forth both in the state level protocol, and you probably have some district protocol too as to what
Yeah.
exactly those specific interventions look like.
And talking to students too, to get information from them about how they feel about being in school and their different classes and why they maybe want to come or don't want to come.
Awesome. Yeah,
Well,
so
it's interesting that you're saying
some
that, Lynn.
qualitative context to
Yeah,
that.
yeah. So that's one of the things that we have been talking about as well at the state level is really looking at barriers. And so when we think about data, often we think numbers, but I also feel like the stories that you're talking about, that's an incredibly important piece of us looking at systems so that we can determine what the barriers are, where can we assist in allocating resources so that those challenges are addressed.
And if you don't know, I didn't know this until a couple months ago, the 211 information request data is public. And so you can see for geographies how much, how many calls they've had for particular types of requests. So it's another way to kind of see some community level data of what might be going on. Kind of like the integrated health survey, where we're not thinking specific to a particular building, but what are some statewide or countywide or geographic trends, region trends that we might be looking at.
It's interesting you say that word, Jess, because I have learned as a result of looking at data, I initially had a knee-jerk reaction every time there was a change. But what I've trained myself to do is instead look at trends. Are we trending in the right direction? So I appreciate you talking about trends.
So thank you, Lynn, for bringing up truancy. It might have planted a seed, right? So sometimes when we think about what data are you looking at, we might just think about the numbers, right? Do these numbers on the screen mean anything to any of you on this call? I'm just curious. Any of these numbers jump out or have any meaning? Sarah, which one jumps out at you and why?
10% jumps out to me immediately as the rate at which chronic absenteeism is statutorily listed.
Yeah, so chronic absenteeism is defined as a student missing 10% or more of their enrolled days, right? So yeah, 10%. Why might 20% be up there? Or why might 5 and 7 and 10 be up there? What are those numbers? What meaning do they make? Or do they make meaning? Anybody?
I want to say that 20% of our students for the past few years have been chronically absent, meaning 1 in 5 students in Maine.
Yeah, that is true for the state. For the state average, it's hovering around 1 in 5 students, a little bit lower for elementary students, right? A little bit higher for our middle and high school students. And Lynn might know this because I know she's paying closer attention to this, but when we're looking at truancy, the 5, the 7, and the 10 are numbers we might look at. Historically, also, if we're looking at interventions, sometimes those interventions were targeted around 5 days, 7 days, 10 days. So these numbers are like common. It might be in the ether when you're thinking about attendance.
Jess, could you help me remember, is it also in statute that after 10 days, a student with an IEP must have an IEP team meeting called to address the challenges?
That's a fantastic question. So I actually connected with a MADSEC board member because that was a question that I had. And so that 10-day determination comes from a discipline removal and needing to have a manifest meeting. So it doesn't actually apply straight up to attendance, but if a student is suspended for 10 or more days, there needs to be a manifest meeting or a total of 10 days, but that's tied to discipline, not like they went on vacation.
I didn't
Right
know
now.
that. Yeah.
Good question. Good
Thank
question.
you.
Yeah. So you get the gold star, Sarah, for noticing that 10%, right? 10% is that threshold that we're looking for with students. The reason that we use that 10% is because that is indicative of more academic risk or challenge. That's why 10% is chosen. And so just that gentle reminder, the student is chronically absent if they miss 10% or more of their enrolled days, and it's for any reason. Which is different from if we're just looking at truancy. If we're using truancy as our threshold or a reason in our system for our younger students, 6th grade and under, from age 5 all the way through if they're enrolled, they are truant if they have 5 consecutive unexcused absences or a total of 7. So we have to be paying attention to the absence type and the number of days and whether they're connected, whether they're consecutive. And then for students in 7th grade and up, that changes to 7 days consecutively of unexcused or 10 non-consecutive unexcused. And we're just hitting that point in the school year where a lot of kids are starting to hit that threshold. The other data point that sometimes comes up that we might be using or monitoring if we're watching our attendance is our average daily attendance. And your average daily attendance is often given as a percentage of the number of students, the percentage of students who are present out of the total opportunity of being present. So typically that number is hovering between like 80% and 95%, right? If you had everyone, you'd be at 100%. Over a number of days, we'd be looking at average, right? The average of that. Unfortunately, it doesn't math that the opposite of your average daily attendance is your chronic absence. It is only your average absence. So that's an anomaly or something to pay attention to. So I'm here to talk about early warning systems. And some of the key things to think about when we think about an early warning system is that ideally an early warning system is real time. So that's either, you're pulling that data or looking at that data weekly, or you can like click the button in Panorama and you can like see the data, right? It's automatically being generated for you. And the components of those warning systems are typically looking at attendance. You pick a threshold or a definition for attendance, looking at behavior, and looking at some sort of academic standing. So that might be looking at a current GPA, that might be looking at the number of course failures or the number of missing assignments. You might also fold into your early warning system nurse visits. There might be a note around what's going on in the family system, or maybe some other social emotional challenge or kind of social work note that might exist in this early warning system that you create. These are kind of the components.
I was so delighted when we were talking about chronic absenteeism at the very beginning that Lynn was able to instantly look up. And so the use of real-time data there, Lynn, to you, I say, nice.
I have a company from my 8th grader. Hold on one second.
Perfect. So, Lynn, you said that this is the first year that you've been in the role as student engagement and attendance coordinator?
Yes. So I'm still kind of learning as I go. And I think early warning systems is definitely something that I'm hoping to kind of improve on moving forward, because right now it's kind of just like maintaining, but how can we be proactive for the future? But I've worked in Lewiston Public Schools. This is my 8th year working here. So I taught at one of the elementary schools in the district. I was a classroom teacher for 5 years. And then I switched to teaching multilingual students. So I have a background in both, which is pretty helpful. in terms of supporting our multilingual population here. And then just like understanding what that entails for students. But the other thing that's been really positive for me is even though we have 5 elementary schools, there are 2 that are much larger and the populations are much more at risk for absenteeism. So there's a lot of students that are struggling with attendance and having truancy issues. And I already know the students and the families, which has definitely been helpful.
That relationship piece cannot be beat.
Yeah.
I'm glad you were able to step into that role, having that foundational background.
Yeah, I heard it come up and I was like, oh my gosh, that would be a phenomenal position. So it's been a really nice kind of change of pace from teaching. I still get to have a lot of student interaction, but I'm able to support them in a different way, which is cool.
Nice.
Thank you. Thank you for understanding there. Little after school chaos. So key fact here, thing to think about is that if it is an early warning system with best practice, and I'm going to give you resources around those pieces too, that you're not just looking at one dimension, right? You're looking at multiple data points, those data points being appropriate indicators for your context, right? And maybe the things that you can manage. So on the screen here is a snapshot from research, from the AIR research brief that's there, of the kind of key indicators or the recommended by research evidence-based indicators. And I'm curious what you notice when you look at these, and whether is that data accessible for you, Lynn, or Sarah, or Julie? How does that look at the state level to be able to look at some of those data points?
I think I do. I definitely have access to attendance and behavior referrals. I should be able to look at students' grades, but I don't know if I have access to course failures. And I do have access to an on-track indicator.
How about Sarah and Julie? How do you see this applying in your context?
It's interesting. We have the opportunity. I did not introduce my colleague Julie Smythe. She is the director of the Office of School and Student Supports, and she is an incredibly knowledgeable person. Under her guidance, we have 4 different teams, and I am with Climate, Culture, and Resilience. But another team that we get to partner with is the school health, coordinated school health. And what's very, very interesting about our team, dynamic about our team, is that everyone on our team is looking at attendance through the lens of the work that they're doing. So when we look at the school nurses and I see that instructional time lost, and I go back to, you said a multi perspective. Don't just go with a flat way of looking at data, but think about, like, what are the other indicators? Our school nurses are working very, very diligently to assist in some systemic changes that will keep those frequent flyers that are often in the nursing station. We realize how much time they're missing by addressing challenges that they see as very real. But what are other tools that we can use? How can we build those relationships? How can we help them with a feeling of connection and mattering so that they're not spending their time in the school nurse or other places, so that they're missing that instructional time? So I saw that, and I love the fact that that's a piece of this very, very clear systemic approach.
And this is a snapshot from a high school brief. There's a middle school brief as well, Lynn. So as you're looking, like, what does this look like? What are the indicators? And you can dig into an evidence base that gives you more specifics. Like on behavior, a student who has more than one ODR in a 6-week period might be the threshold, right? A student who was chronically absent last year might be where you start at the beginning of the year in your early warning system before they've accumulated a month of school. When you're looking at course performance, and I often think about, how BAR is measuring that. BAR is actually a level above an early warning system and is called a student success system. That's looking at multiple courses alongside each other, right? And we're having that data present. So just kind of thinking about what do we know? And this research is is current, right? This is 2024, I think, is the publication date on the brief that was just linked. This resource is a local resource, right? This is a success. This is what's a way that this is being applied in our state. So at Coney, which is a middle and a high school, they use a risk screener. They use a universal screener that they built in-house, right? So what you can see on the screen are 3 screenshots. The link actually takes you to the document they use that's been scrubbed of student names, so you could create your own. The QR code should take you to that same document. If it doesn't, that's my mistake. Y'all can email me. But what you can see is, as Lynn had said, I can see kind of an on track, off track. You can see on the bottom left of the screen down here, that yellow is indicating on a particular student's profile in their student information system where that student is, right? Based on the indicators. Every fall and every spring, they complete this risk screener. So this is a universal screener, not an early warning system, right? And I'm going to show you another graphic in a second that kind of lays these together. But you could update your data more often, and it would get closer and closer to being an early warning system, right? We'd be looking at it potentially a different way. So Coney is willing, Carly, I hope, is willing to connect with people to talk about how she uses this. But again, this is an example of how this is being applied in our Maine context. Thinking about kind of what are the core features you might be looking for if you're building an early warning system in your context. You might say, okay, we're going to be pulling that attendance data and updating that. We're going to learn how to do it in a systematic fashion so we can update it every day. It's not super hard, right? It might be that you create weekly summary reports, or RSU 17 used to have set in their system, it's not there anymore, an automated weekly report that got sent to every teacher of every kid they taught, so they knew where that student was on their absences, right? So you could set up some smaller systems to do this, or maybe you have a shared spreadsheet, and I'm going to give you a QR code and a link to get to that shared spreadsheet. You can also get to it from the Count Me In toolkit, or from the attendance toolkit, which was built with the DOE by Count Me In. Maybe you do these quick team meetings. Maybe
Jess, I'm gonna stop you for just a real quick second. Lynn, I negated to say this at the very beginning. You will have access to the slide deck, which will provide you with all of the links, so you don't have to worry about. I see you taking notes, and I forgot to say that you'll have access to everything that we talk about. So
Awesome. Thank you.
And you
Sure.
can email me if any link that I have in these slides isn't actually the right one, because we all make mistakes. Thank you, Sarah. So thinking about how are we responding? So it's amazing, Lynn, that you have a role to be in charge of all of this, but you can't solve all the problems on your island, right? And so how do you have that team-based response? How are you coordinating a group of people as opposed to being assigned as the person? Maybe you're helping to prioritize based on the early warning system, who needs outreach, what do those supports look like, or building a multi-tiered support or response system. Maybe you're the person responsible for the documentation or the follow-through or the accountability pieces in your system. And it sounds like you're already doing the items listed under number 3. Like you've already shared some of those examples, right? How are you reaching out with families? How are you figuring out what those barriers are? That Sarah also lifted up this idea of thinking about the barriers. The other end of that is, how are we celebrating successes? So an attendance streak would be a student who's, in school for 20 days straight. That'd be a streak. That'd be a way to celebrate. So we could flip it upside down. And instead of looking at it through that deficit mindset, look and see, who are the kids who are here all the time? What's going on? And you all already lifted up belonging. The other piece of this is thinking about the academic components, right? So a student who is struggling academically is going to have a hard time attending school, and a student who's not consistently attending school is going to have a hard time academically. And so it becomes a vicious cycle. And so if we don't look at the academics next to the attendance, or we don't look at the behavior next to the attendance, sometimes we end up with these blind spots. And so that's the other reason, kind of bringing together, layering together the 3 layers. So I probably should have put this earlier in the slides, but this was a really helpful way for me to think about the layers here, right? So if I am developing a robust MTSS in my school, then I'm going to have universal screening. And there are lots of universal screeners out there. There are universal screeners that you can use just for behavior. There are universal screeners you can use just for math, right? There are universal screeners you can use just for ... If you are just sampling the data at certain date points, like our 6-week review of data, and then 6 weeks later we look at data, you're likely using a form of universal screening. You're doing that for all students at specific intervals. To turn that universal screening into an early warning system, you need to be capturing that data more frequency, right? So I am going to look at it every month. I am going to look at it every other week. Oh, wait, I'm going to look at it every week, right? How do we do this and how do we systematize it? Because a human looking at each kid's data and entering it into a spreadsheet individually is
No,
not the way to do that,
it's not
right? So
sustainable.
how do we do that?
Right. So Jess, when you say looking at it to turn it into an early warning system, and you said, okay, so I'm going to look at it each month. Are you saying that someone would go back to the findings each month? Or are you suggesting that there is some type of a quick and easy assessment tool that like all of the classroom educators would be working with their students on, maybe a homeroom teacher would be working on with students? Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah. So you see this really cool universal screener that Augusta is using. If
Right.
Coney used this every month, or I think it was Mesolonsky last year has a rubric that they use to determine senior privileges. And so instead of only determining that at the midterm, at the end of the quarter, if they did that every week, they would be moving from more of a universal screening. We have stationary data
To the
to
early
more
warning.
live data,
Yeah.
right? And
Okay,
so it's
okay, yeah.
decided as these layers, but really there's a continuum in there in how you're doing it, right? If I'm using a behavioral screener, if I'm using an SRSS, and I'm looking at NWEA data, and I'm looking at attendance data, right? And I've developed this universal screener. And then I say, actually, I'm also going to look at ODRs every week, or I'm also going to look at office referrals every week, right? Or I'm going to look at XYZ. I'm going to look at grades. And as you said, like, could the students be part of that? For sure. If you have a homeroom system or an advisory system, can you make your middle school students every Friday go in, look and see what their grades are, right? Reflect on their behavior on the week, give themselves some sort of score, email their parents and dump it into a Google form? You could have your students do some of this work to build your early warning system. This doesn't have to be adult solved problem. You might just have to set that up. And I'm going to give you some other examples or resources around the early warning system. The last here, kind of the destination, the ideal place to head, probably not just for a vacation, but to stay, right, to work towards, is a student success system. And so the vision of a student success system, which is currently really being championed by an organization called Grad Partnership, is that you have not only integrated the data and are looking at multiple pieces of data, but you've created decision rules and interventions that are linked to what you're seeing in that data in a systematic way. So I'll give you an example. So if I'm looking at thinking from a universal screener perspective, I have a list of all the kids who were chronically absent last year. So through universal screening, I got this list. That's static. I have the list. It's about old information. To level that up to an early warning system, I would be looking at attendance, behavior, and course completion or course failure for those students on a weekly basis. Then I would be closer to an early warning system. If I was able to layer on top of that, if those students hit this indicator, right? They're failing one course, they have at least one disciplinary referral, and their attendance is challenging, I'm going to connect them with a mentor. If they're failing 2 courses, they are going to get connected to tutoring. If I have defined that in my system, then I'm moving closer to the success system, right? But these are layers. And so they're built on top of each other, just like when we use an MTSS and we say, we continue the tier 1 supports as we add the tier 2 supports. It's kind of the same thing happening here.
Jess, are you seeing this anywhere in the state actively in use at any?
So some of the schools, I mean, most of the schools who are implementing BAR are
Yes.
using a student success system.
Right.
Right? Now, whether the indicators they're using in their bar matrix are the evidence-based early warning system indicators that come out of research, I don't know. Whether they're universal screeners, right? Some of them might be living in the success system without the foundation of these other two pieces being as tied to the evidence. And so there are a couple places where I see it happen with cohorts, right? This 9th grade class is getting fully wrapped. We got all the things going on for those 9th graders, or we got all the things going on for those 8th graders in transition to 9th grade. But then it takes a lot of resources to do that. And so I don't know if it's sustainably being applied across, right? I think the schools who've been doing bar with fidelity for 5 years, right, for a longer period of time, are the schools who probably have more of these pieces in place. But I'm not working with them, so I can't speak to some of these other indicators that I might be looking for.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
what could you do, right? You're like, this is too big. People listen to this webinar while they're walking on the treadmill. This is too big, right? I don't know how to do this. You don't have to start at the success system level. You could start at the early warning system level and just say mid-year, we're going to do this, this, and this, and figure out where our kids are. What are 2 or 3 indicators that are easy for you to access, right? That are meaningful data points for you. So, Julie talked about the integrated health survey. Look at that data. That's giving you population data. You don't have that for individual students, right? But look at those indicators. Maybe you do a belonging survey with your kids. Maybe you do a trusted adult survey. Maybe you just watch groups of students and see who's sitting by themselves or not playing with anyone at recess. That observational data is data you could use as an indicator, right? So that's one way. What are your indicators? What are you paying attention to? And what are you watching over time? So start small, things you could pay attention to. If your nurse is amazing at documentation, then just start looking at your nursing log. Pay attention to that in your meeting. When you look at your academic data, also look at the nursing data. It will give you information. It will provide more depth and context.
I
Or
love how you keep coming back to it's not just one person's responsibility. The greatest successes are seen when everyone brings their best to the table. I love how you keep going back to, hey, let's engage with the nurses, let's engage with the administrative assistants. These are people that are, maybe the custodian has seen things, maybe the recess assistant has been seeing things. So I like the idea of, the wraparound piece and the community piece. And when we talk about community piece, the school community. So I love how you just keep going back to that.
Can I ask,
go ahead.
Lynn, who do you meet with regularly as a staff? Do you and the nurse sit down regularly? Do you and the school counselor or social worker, do you already have something like that in place?
So not the nurse. I haven't really connected with her too much, unless it's like there's a student who's been absent due to like a medical reason. But we have student support teams that meet weekly. So there's a 7th grade one and an 8th grade one. And that includes the assistant principal. So the middle school utilizes looping. So the entire team loops with the students. So the assistant principal, the dean of students, the social worker, the guidance counselor all loop with each grade. So we have meetings where myself, the individuals I just mentioned, and then we have kind of a pilot program, or I don't know if it's pilot program is the correct term, but it's called OWLS. It's an alternative school option for students. And this year we've been really leaning into it as a support for our truant students. So it happens actually outside of our middle school building. It happens at Tree Street Youth Center. And it's just a smaller, it's about, right now I think we have 7 kids, but it can be anywhere up to like 10. And it's students, in the past it's been like behavioral issues, but this year we're really kind of honing in on truancy. And it's just it's a smaller setting and there's more staff. And it's also a bit more focused on social emotional learning. So there's obviously the academics, they follow the same academics as the middle school, but they also have time where students are doing community service or they're meeting with a mentor and doing something of their choice. They have different activities that they do throughout the week, like they participate in music and cooking, and they go on a weekly field trip. So the individual who runs that program also attends the meetings for the 8th grade.
Do you attend those student meetings as well? Are you in those looping meetings?
Yes.
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 So Jess, I want to ask you, if Lynn and the nurse were then to meet with the data that's collected in those larger group meetings, might that be a step towards tightening up? Because the best success I've seen is when a school nurse, a school counselor, and like an assistant principal, because they didn't have an attendance director, when those three met regularly to talk about student absences, I saw our school go to like 4% chronic absenteeism.
So the short answer is yes, right? The short answer is yes, bring more people into the conversation and you're going to see improvement. I think some of it is deciding where in the system it falls. So I have a slide and a few slides that I can talk a little bit more to kind of how your teamwork gets tiered, right? So just I'll finish the slide and don't lose all my thoughts. But we'll get there, Julie. And I think that's a great example, right? How do we just, I say this a lot, how do we just shift a little bit? Or how do we stop doing something and substitute with something that might be more effective, right? So starting small might be that Lynn has a spreadsheet right now and the nurse has a spreadsheet right now. They have spreadsheets. They have two separate spreadsheets collecting two different sets of data, and that data doesn't get looked at side by side. So if Lynn and the nurse sit down with each other, better yet, if they develop the trust and it makes sense for them to share that and integrate those two spreadsheets, that will improve, right? So we don't necessarily need to do anything more. I was at a middle school yesterday. They have grade level teams. They want their grade level teams to do a little bit of their attendance work, but they didn't feel comfortable with the grade level team seeing all of the attendance data. Okay, no problem. Let's break off the spreadsheets for the grade level teams so they can see their portion of the data. Let's solve the concern, but still make things accessible, right? To be able to look at those pieces. It might also be just doing these stand-up meetings, right? So I guarantee that Lynn's got like 6 kids who all have the same things going on, but she's solving them, kid 1, kid 2, kid 3, kid 4, family, right? But there's the same problem. And so how do we get a huddle together and say, wait a second, it's April, everyone's power is getting turned off. What's our plan? As opposed to this kid, this kid, this kid, this kid. So we can pull people together because we're seeing some indicators. We know this is going to happen, so let's get a little bit more proactive on it, and instead of whack-a-moling it. Thinking about what already works. So if your secretary is your admin assistant is the one making all the phone calls, then tap them into the system to do the work because they already got all the information. Don't call them and ask them 1,000 times about 1,000 different kids. Invite them to the table, right? If teachers are already checking in and doing some of that work, develop a system for them to document that information. Can they put it in the student information system? Is there a place for that information to land that doesn't take a lot more work, right? We don't want it to take any more time. So how do we do that? Is there a Google form that you fill out as you're talking to the family? Do you CC somebody on the message you're sending? Like, how do we do this in a way? The nurse is probably already reaching out, but all the information is collected in individual student files. And none of that data gets collated, so we don't see any school-wide patterns because it's going in each individual kid's file, because that's the way nursing works. So how do we look at that in a way to be able to track patterns? And are the families accessing the information? If they're already logging into PowerSchool to look at things, right? Or can you have their child send them a Friday afternoon update email or a Monday morning update email on where they're at? Do we have space for that? So just thinking about like, what's something we could just do a little bit differently, not more. In the Ed Summit, we asked people to brainstorm or write down the things they were doing that aligned to different ideas. These are the things that schools wrote down that align to early warning systems. So these are ways that you might see an early warning system happening already. These are the seeds. I don't know if I think a couple of these piled together makes a full system, but these are some of the seeds that definitely could grow into early warning systems that are contextually appropriate. And y'all know this, right? But absenteeism, attendance exists along this continuum. And so as we're developing a system, it needs to have responses along a continuum. And we need to think about how they're tiered. So if my job is to address truancy, that truancy is often based on statute, right? It's based on the individual student's data. So that's tier 3. It's an individualized response. But before truancy, there are certain groups of students we know are more likely to be truant. There are students who might have a history of truancy that might be in a group we want to pay more attention to. So perhaps there are tier 2 pieces of that puzzle. Or we might just say, we got a problem, Stan. Over 20% of our kids are truant. We got to look at tier 1. What are we doing across our system? So you ideally in a school would have a team or a group of teams that are just doing tier 1 pieces of your work. Who's paying attention to the system change, to the leadership, to the classroom instruction pieces, the bigger pieces, the tier 1, what are we doing for everyone? And then you have your specialists, and they're paying attention at tier 2. You've got the reading interventionist who understands that a 7th grader who's reading on a 4th grade level is going to have trouble in middle school. And they become part of the conversation. And how do we do that? Right? Or you have your amazing multilingual instructors who understand how to build family partnerships. And not only are they building family partnerships for multilingual, but they're teaching the rest of the staff some of these best practices. We're rubbing them off. We're sharing them, right? We're saying, hey, we could do this for everybody, not just that group of students, right? And then you move to tier 3. The challenge is that if we don't think about how our teams are tiered or our work is tiered, we have too much to do and it all feels disorganized. So embedding it into a multi-tiered structure can help us to feel less chaos. If I am thinking about just attendance, okay, so this is zooming back in. If I'm thinking about just attendance in early warning systems, generally speaking, a student does not go from amazing attendance to really bad attendance overnight. They don't become chronically absent all at once, generally speaking. Yes, something might happen in their life and that might happen, but it is less likely, right? These early patterns, missing 2 days, more than 2 days in September, repeated visits to the nurse, taking long weekends, those are indicators, right? So what's the intervention we can do when we start to see these early patterns? A research study that just came out from School Status, which is a paid school communication platform, found that the schools who responded before 5 absences were able to reduce chronic absence significantly. 5 was a magic number in the research that just came out last week, right? And so if you're waiting until truancy, you are waiting until after 5. And not only is it after 5, but it's 5 unexcused, which is different than 5, right? So 5 unexcused is often a different problem than just 5. And so what is in your system so that you're noticing before 5 and beginning your intervention? You want to start to notice these early so you can respond. You can figure out there was a barrier. You know, kids not come to school because they're experiencing a conflict with a peer. The longer that conflict's going on, the harder it's going to be to solve or to restore that relationship or to even find out what was going on, right? The drama gets bigger and bigger and bigger as the days go on. So this is the quote from School Status. That was actually in the 74, but this is the quote, right? Start your intervention at 3 to 5. And everyone's like, it's November, everyone's over that. That's fine. Start with that intervention anyway. What is it? And what they were recommending was an attendance nudge. That was what they were recommending in their research, was just to send that message.
And I'm just going to point out that when people sign up for the Count Me In newsletter or access the Count Me In web page, there are actually editable templates for nudges, all kinds of different ideas of nudges that can be used. So
that was in the October e-news. Anyone who's looking for it, or email me.
Yeah.
So they said, start with a nudge. Jess, what do you mean, start with a nudge? There's a little text quote over here on the right that comes from a Infinite Campus research study that was done. It was really interesting, right? They say this in their research, 3.3 million text messages or something ridiculous is what they analyzed. So it was a pretty nice data set. The families who received, 50% of the families who received one nudge didn't need another one. But that one nudge was sent in that 3 to 5 window. Okay, so we're layering on some of these pieces, some of these expectations. What does this look like? Reach My Teach is piloting a nudge right now. Any school or district that's using Reach My Teach, FYI. The other thing to think about, right? So that first intervention is important. As you're building out your attendance intervention system, you should have a system, have a plan. It's important to think about matching your tiered supports to the kinds of challenges that you need to address for your students, right? If transportation is the challenge, you're not going to solve that by sending a letter home. If disengagement is the challenge, if the student can't academically access the curriculum, an SEL group isn't going to get them there, right? They need tutoring, they need reading intervention. So just remembering to look at some of that universal screening data you have for your school. If belonging is of question, if kids don't feel like they matter, then maybe at the tier 1, you do some extra stuff around building belonging and relationships and mattering, but also have that connection intervention plan. How do we build?
Yes, one of the things I remember from your presentation at the Ed Summit in August was the importance. You really, and it was interesting because I hadn't thought of it through this lens, but what you talked about is instead of just trying a number of different interventions, it's about the efficiency and the impact of the specific area of challenge. And I one of the things that we hear a lot is, oh, we're trying all kinds of things. Yes, but are they the all kinds of things that are designed to impact this specific type of barrier? That was a real eye-opener for me.
You don't need 60 different interventions, right? If we just use this table that I drafted, right, as guidance, how many interventions are listed in this table? There may be 20 because some of them have a couple multiple things listed, right? There may be 20. You would do those 20 with fidelity.
Yeah.
That's it. I don't want you to do more, right? So engaging instruction means what? Means I have tier 1 instructional practices. Everyone's doing that. We're using explicit teaching. We have an evidence-based curriculum. We're actually doing it. We're not just, I don't know, magic schooling all of our lessons. So how do we do this in a way that makes sense? And how do we build that system? Yes, a student with complex challenges that are keeping them out of school, they might need a plan. They might need a very individualized plan, but we don't have to start every student with an individualized plan. So here are, apparently the one on the left doesn't want to load. Here are 3 additional resources. That's really interesting that that's not loading for you. The one on the left is, there it goes, is an attendance tracking tool that you can get to from the attendance toolkit. It is a Google Sheet. When you first put your data in, the graphs might look a little funny. You can email me and I will Zoom with you and help you fix them if that happens. The second resource is the Everyone Graduates Center details about early warning systems. What does that mean? What is that research base? What do you need to have? What are the key pieces? And then the third one is another guide on early warning systems, but it's also talking more explicitly about MTSS as it talks about early warning system, right? This is all connected. And what are the universal screeners that are out there? right? There's actually a great evidence-based list of universal screeners. And so what are they? You know, if behavior is a problem, if you said, we have a behavior problem, what have you done to understand that problem other than look at Swiss and your office referrals? Like, what have you done to understand what's going on at the system level? So how do we take a step back to see the perspective instead of that particular one tree? You know, how are we looking from behind that? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. You are all amazing beings who may have questions. What questions do you have?
Jess, do you by chance, when you talk about the first resource there that was a little bit persnickety about
Yep.
loading, it's in the attendance toolkit?
It is on the first page on the basics. It is
Basics,
the
okay.
middle link, and
The attendance and truancy tracker.
yeah,
Okay,
and I
okay.
think I can drop it in the chat for you right now, maybe. There are a couple schools who I know are using it right now, who got it from the toolkit. So I know that they were able to get it and use it. If you are not a power school, then you might need some help figuring out how to get the data into it. If you are a power school, then you need to connect with Renette and RSU 10, and she will help you pull your data the most efficiently.
If you are a what school?
A power school.
Okay. Yep.
If you use power school, connect with Renette and RSU 10, and she can help you pull that data in a way that is more efficient, because it is a report that you have to query. If you're an infinite campus school, I can help you do it. It just takes a little bit more time. Not a lot, but a little bit. And I think that's the right link for the elementary.
So Lynn, what's circulating in your head listening to all this?
I think really I'm just trying to like, it's a lot of information, kind of taking it in and thinking like what feels feasible, like what pieces we're already doing here at the middle school and what pieces can be added in. I think one of the big ones, especially at the beginning of the year, most of what I was doing at the beginning of the year was reaching out to families just when there were absences, trying to see who has actually transferred out of Lewiston Public Schools, but we haven't gotten that information yet, things like that, just trying to get trying to get the correct students pulled, but it's kind of giving me food for thought in terms of like, over the summer, what kind of outreach can I be doing with families? And then once the school year does start again, what can I be doing to kind of target those students who maybe had attendance issues the year prior, especially the incoming 7th graders, because the 8th grade students next year who have had attendance issues, I've most definitely had communication with already, but thinking about what can we do for, what can I analyze for the 7th grade students, and then what can I do to help support those students and the 8th grade students who have had issues in the past. But then also like, I don't want to wait until next year to start doing some of these things either. So some of the pieces that you're mentioning around early warning systems, I'm just trying to kind of piece together in my head, what are we already doing well? And where do we need to kind of lift our system up?
If you have not yet accessed the Maine Engagement and Attendance Center webpage, there are all kinds of resources that might be super helpful for you. I'm thinking we partner very we partner closely with Jess and collaborate. It's funny, we were having the conversation about how that word really means two totally different things. But we work very, very closely with Jess, and she's helped us develop a number of resources that you might find helpful, specifically thinking about like a calendar of events. One of the resources I'm thinking about is, what can I be doing in August, or what can I do in July, or what can I do in June that will set me up for the following, the following time frame.
Lynn, if the first thing you do is subscribe to the Count Me In newsletter, you're going to be setting yourself up for success. Jess
Okay.
does an amazing job. And then bookmark the MEAC site and you will have so many resources. But yeah.
So the last thing, we're at 4:28, so we have just a couple more minutes, but I would like to just bring our attention to next month's MEAC Office Hour. Will be held on December 18th, and here we'll be thinking about using consistent, growth-focused attendance messaging, and we will be joined by Rebecca Honig, who is from Parent Powered, and they offer an app that families can access that just has a number of resources available. And again, that positive messaging and just those gentle nudges. So we'll learn a little bit more about that next month. I hope that you're able to join us then. Any last words you'd like to share, Jess?
Have a
I
great
cannot-
evening. It's dark outside.
It's funny. All of a sudden, I thought, I wonder if all the lights in Jess's house just went out, or if it's really
No,
that
there's
dark.
there's a lamp next to me, but the camera on my phone is, yeah. My son did not turn on any lights as the sun is setting. So there is that.
All of a sudden, woo,
Yep,
we're at that time of year, aren't we?
we
Yeah.
are indeed.
Lynn, kudos to you for showing up. Please do not feel like you are alone because you have a lot of resources, not only on this screen, but Jess can connect you to so many who are doing a similar job. So reach out to us anytime. And Sarah is going to follow up with amazing resources.
So yeah, that's the very last thing I want to say is anticipate in the next few days, you will receive an email that will have the recording. It will have all the resources that we've talked about. And you can access that. You can also go back onto the MEAC webpage to access it as well. But I cannot thank you enough for reaching out today. That was fantastic. I was delighted to receive, or maybe it was yesterday, but
No, it's today. And
it was.
I appreciate this. It's been really, it's gotten my brain kind of thinking on like, all right, now that we have this new position, where are we going to take it and how can we really hone in on supporting students and families?
Excellent. Reach out anytime.
All right.
All
Thank
right.
you guys so much.
And with that, have a good evening, folks. Thank you for your time.
Bye.